Tonight, our journey begins not with kings or battlegrounds, but with cheese, glorious, stinky cheese. In the year 1438, Paris teemed with markets where every stall boasted a new curd wheel or block. From goat's milk chèvre to firm sheep's milk tom, the city lived on cheese as surely as we live on air. But that summer, a royal decree threatened to bring the French capital to its knees over spoiled curds. King Philippe VI, known as the Fortunate, prided himself on refined tastes. Seeking to standardize quality across his realm, he issued an edict. Every cheesemaker in Paris must submit monthly samples to a newly formed cheese commission, chaired by none other than the king's own maître forgerie. Failure to pass inspection, anything from a sour tang to an overly chalky texture, meant fines, public shaming, or worse, banishment from the guild. At first, producers grumbled. Marguerite Dubois, a third-generation cheesemonger near Le Halles, recalled in her journal that the maître's palate grew ever more capricious. Today he condemned my fresh goat wheels for being too soft. Tomorrow he fined my tomie for being too hard. Word spread of inspectors sniffing, poking, even tapping cheeses with tiny hammers to judge their center. Rumor says one inspector demanded that no wheel exceed 2 fingers of rind, that anything more was an insult to the crown. Behind the scenes, corruption sprouted like mold. Wealthier merchants slipped inspectors gold coins to overlook minor flaws. Poorer makers faced ruin. In late July, Marguerite found her entire month's production confiscated and dumped into the Seine. They cried, they wailed, she wrote, and the stench of curds and river fish mingled so foully that even the eels swam away. By mid-August, outrage boiled over. Hundreds of cheesemakers camped outside Notre Dame demanded the king revoke his commission. They carried placards that read, "Liberté pour le fromage," and sang bawdy laments in the Latin of old guild songs. The city guard tried to disperse them with pikes and halberds, but the masses held firm, chanting "Vive le goût, vive Marguerite Dubois." Hearing of the unrest, Philippe VI dispatched his chancellor to negotiate. Over a precarious feast of roasted fowl and artisanal breads, ironically served without cheese, the chancellor offered compromise: 3 tiers of cheese inspection, royal, provincial and local, each with its own standards and fees. Marguerite and her colleagues grudgingly accepted, grateful to return to business. But the story didn't end there. In the decades that followed, the commission etched its mark on cheese-making across France. It codified the first written cheese aging periods. No brie could be sold before 3 weeks of ripening. It introduced temperature controls in vaulted caves, pioneering the idea of regulated dairy climates. And it unwittingly inspired the Parisians' obsession with terroir, laying groundwork for modern appellation d'origine contrôlée. Today, when you savor a silky camembert or crumbly roquefort, remember that its very rules were born in a riot over ruined curds. Once deemed a trivial matter of spoiled cheese, this episode shaped how we judge texture, taste, and tradition. And though we tend to think of medieval kings as masters of war and chapel construction, sometimes their legacy relies on something as simple and as delicious as a wheel of cheese. In the summer of 1858, Londoners awoke to a nuisance that transcended mere odour. It was a full-blown public health crisis known simply as the Great Stink. For decades, the Thames had served as the city's open sewer. Sewage, industrial waste, and tannery effluent drifted unfiltered through its waters. But that year, an extraordinary heatwave baked the riverbed, intensifying the stench to unbearable levels. Within weeks, Parliament's windows were taped shut, and proceedings nearly ground to a halt as the fetid air wafted through Westminster Hall, and even dignitaries paraded around with handkerchiefs soaked in vinegar. Day after day, the Thames's surface rippled with floating debris, mounds of decomposing refuse, carcasses of animals, and a slick film of human excrement that glowed in the summer sun. Children played on its banks, blissfully unaware of the bacteria breeding beneath the surface, while laundresses scrubbing clothes in the shallows recoiled from the thick scum clinging to their tubs. Local newspapers carried breathless reports. Ladies faint in Hyde Park, carriages avoid Westminster Bridge, a greengrocer's stall abandoned for 3 days. Medical practitioners sounded the alarm. Cases of putrid fever and cholera spiked alarmingly. especially among the poor living in riverside slums. Dr. John Snow, famed for tracing cholera back to contaminated water, protested that nothing short of a comprehensive sewer overhaul would suffice. Yet entrenched city commissioners balked at the expense, fearing that any plan to reroute London's waste underground would bankrupt the metropolis. Then came a voice from the City of London's engineering corps, Sir Joseph Bazalgette, a relatively obscure chief engineer for the Metropolitan Board of Works. Bazalgette had spent the previous decade surveying the Thames Basin, mapping its tributaries and studying tidal patterns. He proposed an audacious scheme: intercept the sewage before it reached central London, channel it through miles of covered embankments, and deposit it downstream at high tide. The cost, over £3 million, seemed astronomical, but with Parliament itself struggling to convene amid the stench, the House of Commons capitulated. Work began in earnest that autumn. Thousands of labourers tunnelled beneath London's streets, laying brick-lined channels to carry waste away from residential districts. Men worked by the dim light of oil lamps, their pickaxes echoing in the clay as they excavated massive cut-and-cover conduits. In Bermondsey and Deptford, steam-powered suction engines pumped rising water out of the shafts. The project employed over 15,000 men at its peak, navvies who toiled through rain, frost and fetid fumes. By 1865, Bazalgette's northern and southern outfall sewers were complete. Waste no longer sat festering in open streams. Instead, it was swept by gravity and controlled pumping into vast holding tanks to be released into the Thames only at ebb tide. Almost immediately, the improvements showed dramatic results. Cholera outbreaks dwindled, and the Thames's foul odour receded. Londoners once again strolled along the embankment, unaware that beneath their feet snaked the arteries of a hidden hygiene revolution. Yet the triumph was not without irony. Bazalgette's brick tunnels, built more robustly than required, remained serviceable well into the 21st century, accommodating population growth far beyond his wildest projections. His foresight cost an extra few bricks per foot, but those decisions spared future generations from rebuilding London's plumbing infrastructure completely. Today, the River Thames is largely navigable and comparatively clean, a testament to Bazalgette's legacy. But on sweltering summer days, faint echoes of 1858 linger in history books and engineering journals. The Great Stink reminds us that even the grandest city can buckle if its simplest functions, waste transport and water management, are neglected. As you drift off, picture the scene: labourers chiselling into London clay, the rhythmic clank of pickaxes, oil lamp smoke drifting upward, and the promise of a cleaner tomorrow. Imagine a city uniting against a problem so basic that it had filtered beneath the notice of daily life until it became impossible to ignore. And now, let your mind settle on the riverbank's gentle lapping, free from refuse, as heat-hazed London returns to calm nights. Because sometimes, the most transformative stories hide in the muck beneath our feet. In the battle for better bread and booming crops, armies once clashed over bird droppings. Yes, guano, the seabird excrement that revolutionized agriculture and ignited a covert turf war spanning oceans. Tonight, we unravel how this humble fertilizer reshaped nations. Picture the rugged Pacific coast of Peru, circa 1840. 1,000-foot cliffs teem with millions of guano cormorants, their droppings piling into glittering white mounds on rocky islands. Local farmers had long scattered a little guano on vegetable beds, but European botanists soon discovered its supercharged nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium content. A handful of guano could yield harvests that rivaled fields treated with animal manures 10 times the volume. Word spread fast. News of bumper wheat, sugarcane bending under heavy stalks, and corn stalks towering 12 feet high. European governments fell over themselves to secure shipments. The Court of St. James's dispatched naval squadrons to Lima Bay. Britain, France and Germany all signed treaties with Peru, granting exclusive mining rights on certain islands for hefty fees, of course. But contracts were fluid. Smugglers lurked offshore, loading guano onto fast schooners under cover of night. Pirate-like crews bribed Peruvian officials to turn a blind eye. Meanwhile, local islanders watched as once pristine deposits were scraped to bedrock. Workers called guano peelers lived in makeshift wooden shanties, enduring foul air and toxic dust. Many fell ill, some even died of respiratory ailments we now recognize as silicosis. Yet the pay was better than coastal fishing, so they stayed. Tensions peaked in 1869 when a British chartered ship was seized by a rival French captain claiming an exclusive lease. Shots rang out over the harbour. A handful of sailors were wounded. Newspapers dubbed it the Guano skirmish, though no formal declarations of war were issued. Back in Paris, pamphlets warned that England sought to starve France by hoarding phosphate. In London, politicians feigned outrage, while quietly hoarding strategic stockpiles. Over on the US eastern seaboard, entrepreneurs raced to Corner Brook, Nova Scotia, where a massive phosphate deposit was discovered. American farmers saw a local alternative, and soon rail cars ran non-stop to Midwestern plains. But exporting Peruvian guano remained cheaper until exhausted islands forced miners to dig deeper, collapse caves, and send freight costs soaring. By the 1880s, synthetic fertilizers emerged from German laboratories. The Haber process unlocked nitrogen extraction from air. Superphosphate could be produced from rock phosphates worldwide. Suddenly, guano's monopoly evaporated. Peru watched its golden export vanish almost overnight, its economy thrown into turmoil. Former guano islands lie abandoned today, their feathered tenants long since returned to unharvested cliffs. Yet the legacy endures. Modern phosphate mines in Morocco and Florida trace their origins to those 19th century conflicts. And every time you drizzle fertilizer on houseplants or watch fields flourish under chemical feed, you're living in the world shaped by bird droppings and international intrigue. As you let your thoughts settle, imagine the wind-blown white dunes of Guano Islands, the salt-sprayed cliffs alive with cormorants, and the clamor of night raids on creaking schooners. Picture the silvery sheen of freshly harvested fertilizer, destined to transform soil halfway around the globe, because sometimes the smallest granules tell the largest stories. In 1374, Venice stood at the crossroads of commerce and catastrophe. A single ship arriving from the Black Sea carried more than silks and spices. It brought the spectre of plague. Tonight we sail into the Grand Canal's hidden history, where fear led to floating prisons and etiquette rules that trapped priests, pets, and pilgrims in watery limbo. Imagine a Venetian merchant vessel, its hull heavy with cargo, slipping through the lagoon's mist before dawn. Unbeknownst to port officials, hidden below deck lay infected crew, fevered and delirious. Within days, households in Cannaregio whispered of sudden deaths, mothers, artisans, clerks collapsing in the market square. City authorities jolted into action. By summer's end, the Council of Ten decreed a radical approach. Any arriving ship, passenger or cargo from plague-ridden ports must anchor off Lazaretto Vecchio, the old quarantine island, for 40 days, quaranta giorni. This was no mere inspection. Ships were effectively imprisoned on the open water, their crew confined to cramped decks. Cargo was offloaded onto the island under armed guard. Those deemed healthy could enter the island's stone buildings, but anyone showing symptoms faced isolation in separate death cells. Venetian officials erected wooden pavilions and hastily dug graves in the island's garden plots. Clergy assigned to Lazaretto Vecchio risked their lives administering last rites until a curious etiquette code emerged. Priests were required to wear white hoods dipped in vinegar, carry censers of burning juniper, and deliver sacraments at the threshold of death cells, lest they cross the threshold and contract the disease themselves. Pets, too, found themselves unfairly entangled in quarantine law. Ornate lapdogs belonging to visiting nobility were confided to bored young porters, who tied them to posts and fed them scraps through slats in plank barriers. Chroniclers of the time lamented the forlorn howls echoing across the lagoon, but public safety prevailed over aristocratic sentiment. Meanwhile, pilgrims bound for the Holy Land, thousands who passed through Venice's docks each year, had to reckon with the lagoon's floating gaol. Some opted to risk smuggling themselves aboard covert gondolas under cover of night, rather than endure 40 days of isolation. Others waited out the quarantine on Lazaretto Nuovo, a sister island designated for lower-risk arrivals, where conditions were marginally better, but supplies ran low when storms blocked supply boats. Despite grumbles about overcrowding, misrouted cargo, and soaring prices for basic provisions. Venice's quarantine system proved remarkably effective. The city's death toll in 1374 was a fraction of those in Florence or Genoa, both of which lacked comparable isolation measures. In subsequent decades, Venice refined its protocols, building permanent stone hospitals on Lazaretto Vecchio, employing specially trained plague doctors in beaked masks, and keeping meticulous ledgers of every person and box that crossed the lagoon. Yet even the most ironclad rules could crack. In 1438, a disgruntled spice trader bribed a dockmaster to falsify his ship's paperwork. His cargo slipped ashore, and within a week, a new outbreak flared in Dorsoduro. Venetian magistrates responded by tightening inspections, ordering the demolition of a local tavern where the trader had hidden before fleeing the island, sending a stark warning that no one, no matter their rank, was above quarantine law. Over time, as trade expanded to the Americas and disease vectors shifted, Venice's dominance waned. By the late 1600s, more contagious pathogens rendered 40 days insufficient. New quarantines elsewhere adopted longer terms or complete cordons. Lazaretto Vecchio fell into partial disuse, its stone pavilions weathering into silent memorials of a bygone era. Today you can visit the island's crumbling arches and imagine the hush of cloaked figures gliding between cells. You might notice graffiti carved into walls, Giorgio 1374 or Marta 1382. The scrawled names of souls caught between salvation and suspicion. As you let your thoughts drift, picture the lagoon at twilight, gondolas gliding past, the scent of sea salt mingling with sage still sprigs once burned to ward off contagion. Remember that Venice's floating quarantine was born of fear and of ingenuity. It held at bay the terrors of its age, yet nearly cracked when human frailty intervened. Because sometimes the schemes we craft to save ourselves become the very prisons we fear. Imagine a summer so cold it froze rivers in June, starved fields of grain, and drove pastry chefs to despair. In 1816, what should have been the height of summer became a season of frost-bitten blossoms and hollow stomachs forever remembered as the year without a summer. It began with the eruption of Mount Tambora in April 1815. Hidden in Indonesia's Lesser Sunda Islands, Tambora exploded with the force of thousands of atomic bombs, blasting 100 cubic kilometers of volcanic ash into the stratosphere. That ash circled the globe, dimming sunlight and cooling temperatures in the northern hemisphere by up to 3 Fahrenheit. By early 1816, villagers in New England noticed oddities. Snow fell in June in western New York, and lake ice persisted into July near Albany. In Europe, April frosts killed budding apple trees, and June hailstorms pounded barley fields into mash. Across both continents, summer was a cruel joke. In Switzerland, young Mary Shelley and her companions fled to Villa Diodati on Lake Geneva to escape the relentless rain. Cooped indoors by storms and wet, ungenial summer, they read ghost stories sparking Shelley's creation of Frankenstein. Yet behind that literary birth lay genuine dread. Candle-lit dinners punctuated by thunder, soggy lodgings and kitchens running out of wheat. Meanwhile, farmers fared far worse. In eastern Canada, potato blight spread alongside late-season frost, leaving fields barren. Tenant farmers in Ireland watched summer potatoes rot underground, a dark prelude to the Great Famine decades later. In Britain, grain stores fell short, millers rationed flour, and bread prices soared. Riots broke out in East Anglia, where hungry villagers marched on bakeries, demanding to buy grain at pre-eruption rates. Pastry chefs in Paris, who prided themselves on delicate confectionaries, faced an unprecedented dessert shortage. Sugarcane crops in the Caribbean suffered from ash fallout, and beet harvests in northern France failed in the cold snap. Confectioners lamented that no amount of whipped cream or custard could mask the taste of fear. One Parisian pâtissier, Jean-Baptiste Renaud, reportedly offered free pastries to clients in hopes of calming market panic, only to find his ovens damp and dough refusing to rise in the chill. Governments scrambled for solutions. In New England, town meetings authorized emergency corn convoys from the American South, though many shipments spoiled en route. In Switzerland, Cantonal authorities urged citizens to eat less meat and more root vegetables, which fared better in cool ground. Across Europe, scientific societies convened to debate the phenomenon. Was it divine punishment, cosmic alignment, or something yet unknown? The most forward-thinking voices hinted at Tombora. French chemist Louis Pasteur would later observe that volcanic ash could reflect sunlight, but in 1816 this idea seemed mere speculation. Instead, parish priests preached penance, believing the heavens were chastising humanity for sins. A young poet, John Keats, called the season dreary, 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 its very repetition echoing the endless grey skies. By late August, farmers counted losses. Up to 80% of crops failed in New England and parts of Europe. Livestock deprived of forage were slaughtered or left to starve. In the Alps, shepherds sold their last sheep, and in Scotland, kelp became a substitute fertilizer for devastated soils. Despite these hardships, communities adapted. Portuguese monks in Guimarães documented new frost-resistant potato strains, and Dutch horticulturists experimented with greenhouse designs, precursors to modern botanical gardens. It was a year of trial by ice, but also of innovation. People learned to prepare for climate's whims, to share scant resources, and to find creativity amid adversity. As October rolled in, the skies cleared, leaves turned gold on trees unpruned, and the first true autumn in 2 years arrived with crisp air and renewed hope. Yet the memory of that frost-bound summer lingered in diaries, ballads, and local lore. Villagers recounted how the wind showers lasted 40 continuous days, and how church bells tolled for those lost to hunger. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, envision a world draped in mist and frost, where fields lay white, not from snow but from flowering pear blossoms killed by cold. Hear the drip of thawing icicles on thatched roofs, and smell the damp earth, stubbornly clinging to life. Recall Mary Shelley's flickering candlelight, the communal groans over empty bread baskets, and the ingenuity born of desperation. Because sometimes, nature's quiet fury, ash drifting on a still morning, reshapes human history more profoundly than armies ever could. And when the night is darkest, the smallest ember of hope can light the way to a new dawn. Tonight we raise a cup to ancient Rome, but not the wine you expect. Instead, imagine soldiers, laborers, and even athletes guzzling liquid bread, a hearty, nourishing brew that shaped an empire's daily grind and grand spectacles alike. Picture dawn on the Campus Martius, 100 BCE. Legionaries lace their caligae and gather around wooden vats steaming with cervisia, a coarse barley beer. Unlike today's bitter ales, Roman brews were thin and mildly sour, yet rich in calories and safer than most drinking water. Soldiers drank it to fend off hunger on long marches. Farmhands sipped it to power through tilling and harvesting. By midday, the amphitheaters rang with cheers as gladiators fought for glory, and between bouts their trainers offered mugs of the same brew. Rich in carbohydrates and trace minerals, cervisia gave combatants quick energy and helped replenish sweat-soaked salts. Fans in the crowd, from senators to shopkeepers, clinked clay cups in tribute, transforming a simple beer into a unifying ritual. But this wasn't a free-for-all. The Roman state regulated brewing, like any staple commodity. Tax collectors measured grain contributions and levied a cervisia tithe on every batch. Local aediles inspected taverns for hygiene, ensuring brews weren't laced with toxic additives. Lead pipes, we're looking at you. Punishments for adulteration ranged from hefty fines to public whipping, because poison outcry could topple public order. In provincial towns, brewers formed collegia guilds that guarded secret recipes and negotiated pricing with magistrates. Membership carried prestige. Brewers wore bronze tokens at festivals, flaunting marks of quality approved by local authorities. Far from quaint hobbyists, they wielded political clout by stocking guild-sponsored banquets and sponsoring chariot races. Yet in the heart of Rome, senators looked down on beer drinkers. For the elite, wine symbolized refinement, an expression of terroir and pedigree. Cicero penned scathing remarks about those who guzzle barley swill like barbarians. Still, when grain shipments from Egypt ran low, even patricians couldn't resist a flagon of robust cervezia. Fiscal emergencies often blurred the line between civilized wine and vulgar brew. As Rome expanded, it exported its brewing culture across Europe. In Germania and Gaul, local tribes adopted Roman techniques, adding honey, herbs, or even pine resin for flavor. In return, Roman administrators imported Celtic and Germanic brewing methods, creating hybrid styles. Archaeological digs reveal massive breweries near Hadrian's Wall, churning out beer to supply thousands of troops stationed along the frontier. Towards the empire's decline, water scarcity and disrupted supply chains made quality control a nightmare. Some brewers resorted to diluting beer with seawater or infusing toxic sweeteners. Epidemics of poisoned pottage erupted in towns reliant on poorly supervised breweries. By the 5th century CE, wine reasserted dominance, its prestige and stricter production controls outpacing beer's pragmatic appeal. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, picture a legionary pausing in a muddy camp, raising a ceramic cup to the smoky dawn light. Imagine the roar of a Colosseum crowd, each murmur of clinking pottery echoing across stone arches. Feel the pull of camaraderie and commerce entwined in every sip of Roman ale, a humble brew that powered an empire's soldiers, fed its workers, and even fueled its games. Because sometimes the everyday drink carries the weight of history's greatest feats. Imagine a tiny speck of land in the vast Pacific, where towering stone faces stare silently inland, only to learn you've miscounted every last one. In 1774, a simple misprint would shake an entire island community's trust in outsiders. Tonight we chart how one stray zero on Easter Island taught the world a lesson in statistics, sovereignty, and the power of numbers. Captain James Cook arrived at Rapa Nui, Easter Island on Easter Sunday, April 5, 1774. After trading bread and nails with islanders, he sent his lieutenant ashore to record the island's features, including its famed Moai statues. These massive monoliths, some over 30 feet tall, had long captivated Western explorers. Cook's lieutenant dutifully catalogued each statue and their toppled counterparts, counting a total of 532 standing figures. Back aboard HMS Resolution, Cook included the figure in his published voyages, noting that 532 statues watch over this lonely isle. Word spread through European salons. Easter Island must be home to a sophisticated statue-building civilization. Scholars speculated on rituals of idol worship, architectural prowess, even lost empires. But when later expeditions arrived, confusion reigned. In 1825, French naval officer Admiral Dumont d'Urville conducted his own tally and recorded 53 standing statues, 10 times fewer than Cook's report. How could one observer miscount so drastically? Had half the statues fallen over in just 5 decades? Islanders, uneasy at first, eventually concluded that Cook's shipboard secretary had added an extra zero by mistake. The true number was closer to 50 or 60. Yet the error's impact was profound. European scholars, now confronted with conflicting numbers, questioned the reliability of all Pacific Island statistics. Atlas publishers began footnoting Cook's figures as unverified. Local Rapa Nui chiefs, hearing rumors of lost cities and statue forests, felt their island's heritage slipping into myth. On the docks of Valparaiso, traders whispered that no one could trust island reports, so they preferred buying Chilean guano instead. More surprisingly, the stray zero sparked a debate that resonates today: the ethics of data collection. Was Cook responsible for double-checking every figure, even under the pressures of navigation, hostile seas, and limited daylight? Or did the islanders themselves bear some blame for not correcting the record? Minute by minute, Cook's editions had cemented 532 into encyclopedias and museums, shaping Western perceptions of Rapa Nui for generations. Then in the 20th century, a Danish ethnographer named Thor Heyerdahl revisited the counts. Consulting Cook's original ship logs, and only then parsing native oral traditions, he confirmed the true count hovered around 57. More importantly, he spotlighted how colonial narratives, even accidental ones, could overwrite indigenous knowledge. Heyerdahl's work helped spark Rapa Nui's movement for cultural restoration. The island's current census of Moai now serves both as scholarly record and as a point of communal pride. Today, when you gaze at a photo of a lone Moai perched atop Ahu Tongariki, remember that its story is not only of stone and sandstone, but also of numbers and narratives. 1-0 changed how the world saw an entire culture turning a handful of statues into something grander in the European imagination. It reminds us that data isn't just cold fact, it carries weight, influences policy, and shapes identity. So as your mind drifts towards sleep, picture the windswept plains of Easter Island at dusk, the silhouettes of 57 moais standing guard against a fading sky. Feel the quiet hum of the Pacific, and imagine the ripple effect of a single digit in a sailor's tally, how it echoed across oceans, altered academic debates, and ultimately fueled a renaissance of indigenous self-determination. Because sometimes the simplest slip of the pen can echo louder than cosmic storms. In the dying light of a summer evening in 1590, Captain John White stood on the deck of his ship, peering through the salt spray at the familiar coastline of what is now North Carolina. After 3 long years away, he had finally returned to Roanoke Island, his heart heavy with anticipation and dread. Somewhere on that wooded island were the 1,115 colonists he had left behind, including his own daughter Eleanor and his granddaughter Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. What he would find there would become one of history's most enduring mysteries, a puzzle that has captivated historians, archaeologists and storytellers for over 4 centuries. The story of the lost colony begins not with its mysterious end, but with the grand ambitions of Elizabethan England. In the late 16th century, England was emerging as a naval power, eager to challenge Spanish dominance in the New World. Sir Walter Raleigh, a charismatic courtier and favourite of Queen Elizabeth I, had been granted a royal charter to establish colonies in North America. The goal was both economic and strategic: to find gold, establish profitable trade routes, and create a base from which English privateers could raid Spanish treasure ships. Raleigh's first attempt at colonization came in 1585, when he sent an expedition led by Ralph Lane to establish a settlement on Roanoke Island. The island, located in the Outer Banks of present-day North Carolina, seemed ideal. It was protected from Atlantic storms by barrier islands, had fresh water sources, and was inhabited by Native American tribes who initially seemed friendly to trade. The local Algonquian-speaking peoples, led by Chief Wingina, had complex societies with established agriculture, fishing and hunting practices that had sustained them for generations. However, the 1585 colony was doomed from the start. The 1,008 men who comprised this first settlement were largely soldiers and gentlemen adventurers, few of whom had practical skills in farming, building, or the crafts necessary for survival in a new land. They had come expecting to find gold and quick riches, not to engage in the hard work of establishing a permanent settlement. Relations with the Native Americans quickly soured as the colonists made increasing demands for food and supplies, showing little respect for indigenous customs or sovereignty. The colonists' situation became increasingly desperate as supplies dwindled and promised relief ships from England failed to arrive on schedule. Disease began to take its toll, and conflicts with the Native Americans escalated. Chief Wingina, initially welcoming, grew hostile as he realized the English intended permanent occupation rather than temporary trade relationships. Tensions exploded into violence, culminating in Ralph Lane's decision to launch a preemptive attack on Wingina's village, during which the chief was killed. By June 1586, when Sir Francis Drake arrived with his fleet after raiding Spanish settlements in the Caribbean, the colonists were eager to abandon their failed enterprise. Despite Drake's offer to leave supplies and additional men, Ralph Lane chose to evacuate the entire colony back to England. Ironically, a relief ship sent by Raleigh arrived just days after the evacuation, finding only empty buildings and the bodies of several colonists who had been killed in the final conflicts with the Native Americans. Undeterred by this failure, Raleigh immediately began planning a second colony. This time, the approach would be different. Instead of soldiers seeking quick wealth, the new colony would consist of families committed to permanent settlement. They would establish their community on Chesapeake Bay, farther north than Roanoke Island, in territory that seemed less politically complicated. The colony would be governed not by military command, but by a council of 12 men, with John White, an artist and gentleman who had been with the first expedition, serving as governor. John White was an interesting choice for colonial governor. Unlike the military men who had led previous expeditions, White was cultured and observant, with a genuine interest in the New World and its inhabitants. During the 1585 expedition, he had created detailed watercolor paintings of Native American life, flora and fauna, artwork that remains among our most valuable records of indigenous Carolina culture. His appointment reflected Raleigh's new vision of colonization as a civilizing mission, rather than merely a military conquest. The second colony, officially known as the Colony of Raleigh in Virginia, set sail from England in May 1587. The expedition consisted of 115 colonists, including women and children, a clear indication that this was intended as a permanent settlement. Among the colonists was White's pregnant daughter Eleanor, married to Ananias Dare. The diversity of the group was notable for its time. There were craftsmen, farmers, a minister, and even a few families of modest means seeking new opportunities in the New World. The journey across the Atlantic was long and difficult, as ocean voyages invariably were in the 16th century. Ships were small and crowded, with limited provisions and no protection from storms or pirates. Disease was a constant threat in the close quarters, and several colonists died during the crossing. When they finally reached the American coast in July 1587, the colonists were exhausted and eager to begin their new lives. However, their plans immediately went awry. Simon Fernandez, the Portuguese pilot navigating their ship, refused to take the colonists to Chesapeake Bay as planned. Whether this was due to practical concerns about the late season and dangerous waters, or because he was more interested in privateering against Spanish ships than in supporting a colonial settlement, remains unclear. Instead, he insisted on landing the colonists at Roanoke Island, the site of the previous failed colony. This decision would prove fateful. Roanoke Island was smaller and less suitable for a large settlement than the Chesapeake Bay location had been. More importantly, it was the site of the previous colony's conflicts with the Native Americans. The local tribes had not forgotten the violence of 1585 to 1586, and they viewed any English presence with suspicion and hostility. Despite these challenges, the colonists set about rebuilding the abandoned settlement. The houses from the previous colony were still standing, though they needed extensive repairs. The colonists cleared fields, planted crops, and began the work of establishing their community. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor White Dare gave birth to a daughter, whom she named Virginia, the first English child born in what would become the United States. However, it quickly became clear that the colony was in a precarious position. Supplies were running low, and the late planting season meant that crops would not be ready before winter. Relations with the Native Americans remained tense, with several violent incidents occurring in the first weeks after landing. Most seriously, George Howe, one of the colonists, was killed by Native Americans while crab fishing alone, his body found riddled with arrows. Faced with these mounting problems, the colonists made a crucial decision. They convinced Governor White to return to England to secure additional supplies and reinforcements. This was an enormous responsibility and a personal sacrifice for White, as it meant leaving behind his daughter and newborn granddaughter. However, the colonists argued that his personal connections to Raleigh and his first-hand knowledge of their situation made him the best choice to advocate for their needs. Before departing, White and the colonists agreed on a communication system. If the colonists were forced to leave Roanoke Island, they would carve their destination into a prominent tree or post. If they left under duress or in danger, they would add a Maltese cross to the message. This simple arrangement would later become the key to one of history's greatest mysteries. White departed Roanoke Island on August 27, 1587, just 9 days after his granddaughter's birth. He expected to return within a few months with supplies and additional colonists. Instead, he would not see American shores again for 3 years, and what he found upon his return would haunt him for the rest of his life. The delay in White's return was not due to any lack of effort on his part. When he reached England in November 1587, he immediately began working to organize a relief expedition. However, he had returned to a nation preparing for war. Intelligence reports indicated that King Philip II of Spain was assembling a massive fleet, the Spanish Armada, to invade England and restore Catholic rule. Queen Elizabeth I had issued orders that no ships were to leave English ports except for defensive purposes. Raleigh, despite his commitment to the colony, was required to contribute his ships to England's defence. The colonists' fate became secondary to national survival. White managed to secure passage on 2 small ships in April 1588, but this expedition was a disaster. The ship captains were more interested in privateering, attacking and looting other vessels, than in reaching the colony. After engaging in several sea battles and suffering significant damage, the ships returned to England without ever reaching America. The summer of 1588 brought the climactic naval battle between the English fleet and the Spanish Armada. The English victory was celebrated throughout the realm, but it did nothing to help the stranded colonists. White continued his efforts to organize a relief expedition, but resources remained scarce, and Raleigh's attention was focused on other ventures. By 1589, White had managed to interest several London merchants in funding a voyage, but even this expedition was delayed by bureaucratic complications and the ongoing demands of England's naval commitments. It was not until March 1590 that White finally departed England as part of a privateering expedition led by John Watts. Even then, the primary purpose of the voyage was not colonial relief, but the capture of Spanish treasure ships. The journey to America took nearly 6 months, as the ships stopped at various Caribbean islands to engage in privateering activities. White, desperate to reach his family, could only watch in frustration as opportunities for quick profit repeatedly delayed their progress toward Virginia. Finally, in August 1590, 3 years after he had left them, the expedition reached the Outer Banks of North Carolina. The reunion White had long imagined was not to be. As his boat approached Roanoke Island on August 18, 1590, coincidentally his granddaughter Virginia's 3rd birthday, he saw smoke rising from the settlement area. Hope flared in his heart. Surely this meant the colonists were still there, maintaining their fires. However, as they drew closer, it became clear that the smoke was coming from a forest fire, not from cooking fires or hearths. Landing on the island, White immediately noticed that the settlement had been enclosed with a high palisade of logs, suggesting the colonists had felt threatened and had fortified their position. However, the fort was empty. The houses had been carefully dismantled, with the materials apparently salvaged for use elsewhere. Personal belongings were scattered about, but there were no signs of violence or hasty departure. Most mysteriously, White found the prearranged signal he had agreed upon with the colonists. Carved into a post at the entrance to the fort was the word Croatoan, the name of a nearby island inhabited by friendly Native Americans. Significantly, there was no Maltese cross accompanying the carving, suggesting that the colonists had not left under immediate duress. White was elated. Croatoan Island, about 50 miles south of Roanoke, was home to Chief Manteo, a Native American leader who had traveled to England with earlier expeditions and had maintained friendly relations with the English. If the colonists had gone there, they were likely safe and might even have integrated with the local community. However, White's hopes were quickly dashed. The ship captains, concerned about the approaching hurricane season and eager to continue their privateering activities, refused to make the journey to Croatoan Island. Despite White's desperate pleas and offers to pay for the additional voyage from his own funds, the expedition departed for England the next day. John White never returned to America. He spent his remaining years writing letters and appealing to anyone who would listen, trying to organize another expedition to find the lost colonists. His personal writings from this period reveal a man consumed by guilt and grief, tormented by the thought that his daughter and granddaughter might be alive somewhere, waiting for rescue that would never come. The mystery of the lost colony has captivated investigators for centuries. In the absence of definitive evidence, numerous theories have emerged to explain what happened to the 1,115 colonists. Some historians believe the colonists attempted to sail back to England on their own and were lost at sea. Others suggest they were killed by hostile Native Americans, either immediately after White's departure or during the harsh winter of 1587 to 1588. However, the most compelling theories involve the colonists' integration with local Native American communities. The carving of Croatoan suggests they may have initially joined Chief Manteo's people on Croatoan Island, now Hatteras Island. From there, they might have moved inland, joining other Algonquian communities, or establishing mixed communities of English and Native American families. This theory is supported by later reports from English explorers and colonists, who established Jamestown in 1607. Captain John Smith, the famous leader of the Jamestown colony, reported hearing from Native Americans about white people living among various tribes inland from the coast. Some of these reports were quite specific, describing people with European features who wore English clothing and knew English customs. In 1709, English explorer John Lawson reported meeting Native Americans in the interior of North Carolina who claimed descent from white people who could talk in a book, presumably meaning they could read and write. These people had grey eyes and spoke some English words, though they had been fully integrated into Native American society for generations. Archaeological evidence has provided tantalizing but inconclusive clues about the colonists' fate. Excavations on Roanoke Island have uncovered European artifacts from the colonial period, but nothing that definitively explains what happened to the people. More intriguingly, excavations at several Native American sites in the region have found European objects that could have belonged to the lost colonists, including parts of weapons, tools, and even jewelry. Recent archaeological work has focused on two main sites, Hatteras Island, the former Croatoan Island, and a location about 50 miles inland on the Chowan River. Both sites have yielded European artifacts dating to the late 16th century, suggesting that at least some of the colonists may have survived and integrated with Native American communities. The Hatteras Island site, excavated by archaeologists from the University of Bristol and East Carolina University, has produced numerous European artifacts mixed with Native American materials from the late 1500s. These include parts of iron tools, copper ornaments, and even a signet ring that may have belonged to one of the colonists. The mixed nature of the artifacts suggests a community where English and Native American people lived and worked together. The inland site, discovered through analysis of a map drawn by John White himself, has also yielded promising evidence. Hidden beneath patches on White's map, researchers have found marks indicating secret English settlements. When archaeologists investigated one of these locations, they found European pottery and other artifacts dating to the right time period. However, despite centuries of investigation, no definitive proof of the colonists' fate has ever been found. No European burial grounds, no clearly identifiable colonist artifacts, and no unambiguous historical records have emerged to solve the mystery definitively. The human stories behind the historical mystery are perhaps the most compelling aspect of the Roanoke tale. Consider Eleanor White Dare, just 25 years old when her father sailed away, left to care for her infant daughter in a precarious wilderness settlement. What decisions did she and the other colonists make during those 3 long years? How did they survive the winters, the food shortages, the constant threat of conflict? Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America, has become a particularly poignant symbol of the lost colony. If she survived, she would have grown up in a world completely different from anything her parents had known, perhaps learning Algonquian languages, participating in Native American customs, and living a life that bridged 2 very different cultures. The other colonists too, each had their own stories. There was Thomas Stevens, a blacksmith whose skills would have been invaluable to the community. There was Dionyse Harvey, listed in the records simply as a man of London, about whom we know almost nothing else. There were the families with children, the Archers, the Baileys, the Joneses. Each person represented hopes, dreams, and fears that were cut short or transformed by their mysterious fate. The psychological impact on John White cannot be overstated. His journal entries and letters from his later years reveal a man haunted by his decision to leave the colony. He blamed himself for their disappearance, wondered constantly about their fate, and never stopped hoping that somehow, somewhere, his daughter and granddaughter had survived. The lost colony has had a profound impact on American culture and identity. It represents both the promise and the peril of European colonization of North America. The mystery has inspired countless books, plays, and films, each offering different theories about what happened to the colonists. The outdoor drama The Lost Colony, performed annually on Roanoke Island since 1937, has introduced millions of visitors to the story. More broadly, the Roanoke colony represents the complex and often tragic interactions between European colonists and Native American peoples. Unlike later colonial enterprises that were backed by powerful companies or governments, Roanoke was a relatively small, vulnerable community that had to negotiate survival in a world dominated by indigenous peoples who had their own complex political and social structures. The mystery also highlights the precarious nature of early European settlement in North America. The colonists were entirely dependent on irregular supply ships from England, vulnerable to changes in international politics, and isolated from any possibility of assistance from other European settlements. Their disappearance reminds us how easily these early colonial ventures could fail, leaving barely a trace of their existence. For Native American communities, the Roanoke story is part of a larger narrative of European colonization that would eventually transform their world completely. The Croatoan people, who may have provided refuge for the lost colonists, were themselves facing enormous pressures from European diseases, trade disruptions, and territorial encroachment. The integration of English colonists into Native American communities, if it occurred, would have been part of complex strategies for survival in a rapidly changing world. Modern DNA studies have attempted to trace possible descendants of the lost colonists among contemporary Native American and mixed-race communities in the region. While some intriguing genetic markers have been found, the results remain inconclusive. The passage of more than 4 centuries, combined with the complex patterns of migration and intermarriage in the region, makes it extremely difficult to establish definitive genetic connections. The most recent archaeological and historical research suggests that the fate of the lost colonists was probably not a single dramatic event, but rather a gradual process of integration, migration, and adaptation. Some colonists may have died from disease or starvation in the first harsh winter after whites' departure. Others may have joined friendly Native American communities, first on Croatoan Island and later in various inland settlements. Over time, these survivors and their children would have become increasingly integrated into Native American society, adopting indigenous languages, customs, and ways of life, while contributing their own skills and knowledge. Their European identity would have gradually faded, preserved perhaps only in family stories, unusual physical features, or scattered material possessions. This theory, while less dramatic than stories of massacre or miraculous survival, is probably closest to the historical truth. It reflects the reality of cultural exchange and adaptation that characterized much of the colonial period, when European and Native American communities often found ways to coexist and intermarry despite their many differences. The search for the lost colonists continues today, driven by new technologies and methodologies. Ground-penetrating radar, advanced archaeological techniques, and sophisticated analysis of historical documents continue to yield new clues. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, though the complete picture remains frustratingly elusive. Perhaps the enduring fascination with the lost colony lies not in the hope of solving the mystery definitively, but in what the story represents about human resilience, adaptation, and the complex interactions between different cultures. The colonists of Roanoke, whether they perished quickly or survived to become part of a new hybrid community, were pioneers in the truest sense, people who ventured into the unknown and whose fate became intertwined with the broader story of American origins. As we consider their story more than 4 centuries later, we might imagine Eleanor Dare teaching her daughter Virginia to speak both English and Algonquian, or Thomas Stevens, the blacksmith, sharing his metalworking skills with Native American craftsmen. We might picture gradual friendships forming between English families and their Native American neighbors, or children growing up in communities where European and indigenous traditions blended into something entirely new. The lost colony of Roanoke remains America's oldest unsolved mystery, a reminder of the countless untold stories that lie buried in our past. Whether the colonists met with tragedy or triumph, their disappearance marked the end of one story and the beginning of another, the long, complex and ongoing story of cultural encounter and exchange that has shaped American history from its very beginning. In the end, perhaps John White's granddaughter Virginia Dare, wherever she lived and however she died, became the first true American, a person whose identity was forged not in the familiar landscapes of Europe, but in the challenging, promising and mysterious world of the New World itself. In the crystalline waters off the Greek island of Antikythera, where the Aegean and Mediterranean seas meet in an eternal dance of currents and tides, lies one of history's most extraordinary secrets. It is a secret that remained hidden for over 2,000 years, buried beneath sand and coral, forgotten by time itself. When it was finally discovered in 1901, it would challenge everything scholars thought they knew about ancient technology and force us to completely reconsider the sophistication of our ancestors. The story begins not with ancient Greeks but with humble sponge divers from the small island of Symi, men who made their living plunging into the depths of the Mediterranean to harvest the sea's bounty. In the spring of 1900, Captain Dimitrios Kondos and his crew were returning from a profitable season diving for sponges off the coast of North Africa, when a violent storm forced them to seek shelter near the tiny rocky outcrop of Antikythera. Antikythera is barely more than a speck on the map, a barren island lying between the Greek mainland and Crete, swept by fierce winds and surrounded by treacherous waters. Ancient mariners knew these waters well, for this was a major shipping route connecting Rome with the wealthy cities of the eastern Mediterranean. But the same currents that made it a natural highway also made it a graveyard for ships caught in sudden storms. As the weather cleared, Elias Stadiatis, one of Kondos's most experienced divers, descended into the depths to search for sponges. What he found instead would change our understanding of the ancient world forever. At a depth of nearly 200 feet, Stadiatis discovered not sponges, but the scattered remains of an ancient shipwreck. Bronze and marble statues lay strewn across the seafloor, their surfaces green with age and encrusted with marine growth. Like silent guardians of some underwater museum, the discovery electrified the archaeological world. Here was a Roman-era vessel, probably dating to the 1st century BCE, carrying what appeared to be an extraordinary cargo of Greek art treasures. The ship had likely been bound for Rome, carrying the spoils of conquest, or perhaps valuable artworks being transported for wealthy collectors. The Greek government immediately commissioned a major salvage operation, and over the following months divers recovered an astonishing array of artifacts: bronze and marble statues, pottery, jewelry, coins, and glassware. Among the recovered treasures were some of the finest examples of ancient Greek sculpture ever found. The bronze youth of Antikythera, a magnificent statue of a young man with one arm raised, became one of the most celebrated pieces in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. There was also the Antikythera Ephebi, another bronze figure of extraordinary beauty and craftsmanship. These statues alone would have made the wreck one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the modern era. But buried among these obvious treasures was something that initially drew little attention. It was a heavily corroded lump of bronze and wood, about the size of a shoebox, so encrusted with marine growth that its true nature was completely obscured. To the archaeologists of 1901, it appeared to be nothing more than a corroded piece of the ship's equipment, perhaps part of an anchor or some other maritime hardware. It was catalogued simply as bronze object and stored away in the museum's collection. It might have remained there forever, forgotten among thousands of other artifacts, had it not been for a curious accident. On May 17, 1902, archaeologist Valerios Stais was examining artifacts from the wreck when he noticed that the corroded bronze lump had split open, revealing something extraordinary within. There, embedded in the green patina of age, he could make out the unmistakable shape of a gear wheel. Stais was astounded. Gear mechanisms were not supposed to exist in the ancient world, at least not with the sophistication that this fragment seemed to suggest. The discovery challenged fundamental assumptions about ancient Greek technology. According to the prevailing understanding of the time, complex gear systems were a medieval invention, developed centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire. Yet here was physical evidence of precisely such a mechanism, recovered from a ship that had sunk over 2,000 years ago. The initial reaction from the academic establishment was one of skepticism and outright disbelief. Many scholars refused to accept that the Greeks could have created such sophisticated mechanical devices. Some suggested that the object was a medieval astrolabe that had somehow found its way into the ancient wreck, perhaps dropped by a later visitor to the site. Others dismissed it entirely as a modern contamination or a hoax. But Stiers persisted in his investigation, and gradually more details of the mysterious object began to emerge. As the incrustation was carefully removed, more gears became visible, along with what appeared to be inscribed text in ancient Greek. The mechanism was clearly ancient, and it was clearly far more complex than anything historians had imagined the Greeks capable of creating. The first serious attempt to understand the mechanism came from Admiral John Theophanidis of the Royal Hellenic Navy, who published a paper in 1934 suggesting that it was some kind of navigational instrument. But it was not until the 1950s that a breakthrough came, thanks to the work of Derek J. de Solla Price, a British physicist and historian of science at Yale University. Price approached the Antikythera mechanism with the systematic methodology of modern science. Using X-rays and careful mechanical analysis, he began to map out the internal structure of the device, revealing a complexity that was truly breathtaking. What he found was not a simple navigation tool, but an intricate computer designed to calculate and predict the movements of celestial bodies with remarkable precision. The mechanism consisted of at least 37 bronze gear wheels of varying sizes, all interconnected in a sophisticated system that could model the motions of the sun, moon, and planets as they were understood by ancient Greek astronomers. By turning a hand crank, an operator could advance the mechanism through time, watching as pointers moved across dials to show the positions of celestial bodies on any given date, past or future. But the mechanism's capabilities went far beyond simple astronomical calculation. It could predict solar and lunar eclipses, track the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games, and even account for the irregular motion of the moon as it orbited the Earth. This last feature was particularly sophisticated, requiring the use of an epicyclic gear system that was not thought to have been invented until the Renaissance. The level of precision built into the mechanism was extraordinary. The main gear wheel had 223 teeth, corresponding to the Saros cycle, the 223 lunar month period after which eclipse patterns repeat. This was not coincidental. It demonstrated that the mechanism's creators had a deep understanding of complex astronomical phenomena and the mathematical relationships underlying them. Price's work revealed that the Antikythera mechanism was essentially an ancient analog computer, capable of performing calculations that would not be matched until the development of medieval astronomical clocks more than 1,000 years later. His findings, published in a series of papers culminating in his 1974 book, Gears from the Greeks, revolutionized understanding of ancient Greek technology and science. The implications were staggering. If the Greeks could create such sophisticated mechanical computers, what other advanced technologies might they have possessed? The discovery forced historians to reconsider their assumptions about the trajectory of technological development, suggesting that there had been peaks of sophistication in the ancient world that were subsequently lost and not rediscovered until much later. But Price's work was only the beginning. In recent decades, advances in imaging technology have allowed researchers to peer deeper into the mechanism's secrets than ever before. In 2005, an international team of researchers led by Mike Edmonds of Cardiff University began using advanced CT scanning and three-dimensional imaging to create the most detailed analysis of the mechanism ever attempted. Their findings revealed even more complexity than Price had imagined. The mechanism contained at least 82 fragments, many with inscribed text that served as a kind of user's manual for the device. The inscriptions revealed details about the mechanism's operation and purpose, confirming that it was indeed designed to predict astronomical phenomena with remarkable accuracy. The text also provided clues about the mechanism's origins. The style of the Greek lettering and the astronomical assumptions built into the device suggested that it was created sometime between 150 and 100 BCE, during the Hellenistic period when Greek science and technology reached their peak. The mechanism may have been built on the island of Rhodes, which was known in antiquity as a center of astronomical research and mechanical engineering. One of the most intriguing aspects of the mechanism is what it reveals about ancient Greek astronomy. The device incorporates sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics, including knowledge of the irregular motion of the moon and the complex cycles of planetary movement. This suggests that Greek astronomers had developed mathematical models of remarkable sophistication, comparable in some ways to the work of Johannes Kepler in the 17th century. The mechanism also demonstrates the practical application of theoretical knowledge. This was not merely an academic exercise, but a working tool designed for real-world use. It may have been used by astronomers to prepare calendars, predict eclipses for religious or civil purposes, or even for astrological calculations, which were an important part of ancient scientific practice. The question of who built the Antikythera mechanism remains one of its greatest mysteries. The level of craftsmanship required suggests a workshop with highly skilled artisans and access to advanced mathematical knowledge. Some scholars have suggested connections to the great astronomers and mathematicians of the Hellenistic period, such as Hipparchus of Nicaea, who made fundamental contributions to astronomy and trigonometry. Hipparchus, who lived in the 2nd century BCE, was known for his precise observations of celestial phenomena and his mathematical approach to astronomy. He discovered the precession of the equinoxes, developed the first comprehensive star catalogue, and made accurate measurements of the length of the solar year. The sophisticated astronomical knowledge incorporated into the Antikythera mechanism would have been consistent with Hipparchus's work and that of his contemporaries. Another possibility is that the mechanism was connected to the Antikythera Rex cargo manifest. The ship was carrying luxury goods and artworks that were likely destined for wealthy Roman collectors. The mechanism might have been part of this precious cargo, perhaps owned by a wealthy patron interested in astronomy and mathematics, or intended as a gift for someone of high status in Roman society. The ship itself tells a fascinating story. Analysis of the wreck suggests it was a large merchant vessel, possibly over 100 feet in length, capable of carrying enormous loads of cargo across the Mediterranean. The diversity of artifacts recovered from the wreck indicates that it was engaged in the lucrative trade in luxury goods that connected the Greek world with Rome and other Mediterranean markets. The timing of the shipwreck is particularly poignant. The vessel sank during a period of tremendous upheaval in the Mediterranean world. The Roman Republic was expanding eastward, conquering Greek territories and carrying off their cultural treasures. Many of the statues and artworks found in the wreck may have been spoils of war, Greek masterpieces being transported to Rome to decorate the villas and gardens of Roman elites. In this context, the Antikythera mechanism represents something even more significant than a remarkable piece of ancient technology. It embodies the sophisticated scientific culture of the Hellenistic world at the moment of its eclipse by Roman power. The mechanism's sinking may have been symbolic of the broader fate of Greek scientific knowledge, much of which was lost or forgotten during the political and cultural transformations of the Roman period. The loss of such knowledge was not unique to the Antikythera mechanism. The ancient world possessed many technological capabilities that were subsequently forgotten and had to be rediscovered centuries or even millennia later. Greek fire, Roman concrete, Damascus steel, all were examples of sophisticated technologies that disappeared from use and were not fully understood until modern times. This pattern of technological loss and rediscovery challenges popular assumptions about the steady progress of human knowledge. The Antikythera mechanism demonstrates that technological development is not always linear, that sophisticated capabilities can be developed and then lost, leaving later generations to reinvent what their ancestors had already achieved. The mechanism also highlights the importance of individual craftsmen and their workshops in preserving and transmitting technical knowledge. In the ancient world, such knowledge was often closely guarded, passed down through family workshops or guild traditions. When these transmission networks were disrupted by war, disease, or social change, entire bodies of knowledge could disappear virtually overnight. Modern attempts to reconstruct the Antikythera mechanism have revealed just how sophisticated its creators were. Building a working replica requires not only advanced knowledge of gear ratios and mechanical engineering, but also access to precision metalworking techniques and mathematical calculations of extraordinary complexity. The fact that ancient craftsmen achieved this level of sophistication using only hand tools and ancient metallurgical techniques makes their accomplishment even more remarkable. Several working reconstructions of the mechanism have been created by modern researchers and craftsmen. These replicas demonstrate that the device would indeed have functioned as described, accurately predicting celestial phenomena and providing a mechanical model of the ancient understanding of the cosmos. The replicas also reveal the mechanism's elegant design, with its complex system of gears working together in perfect harmony to model the intricate dance of celestial bodies. The cultural impact of the Antikythera mechanism extends far beyond the world of archaeology and ancient history. Its discovery has inspired countless works of fiction, from novels to films, imagining what other advanced technologies the ancient world might have possessed. It has become a symbol of lost knowledge and forgotten wisdom, a reminder that our ancestors may have been far more sophisticated than we commonly assume. The mechanism has also influenced modern thinking about the relationship between science and technology. In the popular imagination, ancient Greece is often associated with abstract philosophical thinking rather than practical engineering. The Antikythera mechanism demonstrates that this distinction is false, showing that the Greeks were capable of applying their theoretical knowledge to create sophisticated practical devices. For historians of science, the mechanism represents a crucial piece of evidence about the continuity of scientific knowledge from the ancient world to the medieval and modern periods. It shows that many of the mathematical and mechanical principles that we associate with later periods were actually known to ancient scientists, even if the physical evidence of their applications has been lost. The ongoing study of the Antikythera mechanism continues to yield new insights. Researchers are still working to decode all of the inscribed text on the device, which may reveal additional information about its construction, use, and historical context. New imaging techniques and analytical methods are constantly being applied to the fragments, each potentially revealing new details about this remarkable artifact. Recent work has focused on understanding the mechanism's relationship to ancient astronomical texts and mathematical treatises. By comparing the device's design with surviving written sources, researchers are building a more complete picture of ancient scientific practice and the ways in which theoretical knowledge was translated into practical applications. The mechanism also serves as a case study in the preservation and analysis of ancient artifacts. The challenges involved in studying a heavily corroded bronze object that has spent 2 millennia underwater have pushed the boundaries of archaeological science. Techniques developed for analyzing the mechanism have been applied to other ancient artifacts, advancing our ability to understand and preserve the material remains of the past. As we contemplate the Antikythera mechanism today, we are reminded of the profound depths of human ingenuity and the tragic fragility of knowledge. Somewhere in the workshops of ancient Rhodes or another Greek city, skilled craftsmen once labored to create this mechanical marvel, their work representing the culmination of centuries of astronomical observation and mathematical insight. The mechanism's journey from those ancient workshops to the bottom of the Mediterranean, and then to its rediscovery and gradual understanding by modern science, reads like an epic tale of human achievement, loss and recovery. It reminds us that history is not a simple story of progress from primitive beginnings to modern sophistication, but rather a complex tapestry of achievement and loss, discovery and forgetting. In the end, the Antikythera mechanism stands as a testament to the power of human curiosity and ingenuity. Its creators, working with nothing but bronze gears and mathematical insight, created a device that could model the cosmos with remarkable precision. Their achievement, lost beneath the waves for 2 millennia, has now been recovered and recognized, taking its rightful place as one of the greatest technological marvels of the ancient world. The story of the Antikythera mechanism continues to unfold, with each new analysis revealing additional secrets about this extraordinary device and the brilliant minds that created it. As we continue to study this ancient computer, we are reminded that the human quest to understand and model our universe is as old as civilization itself, and that sometimes the most profound discoveries come from the most unexpected places, even from the depths of the sea.